Hi, thank you for joining me for classical drawing tips. And today we'll look at sketching a glass of soda. So I offer private lessons and consultations and what I call friendly feedback via Zoom and video recording and also in person for people who live locally. I like to use the word friendly feedback instead of critique because I don't think anybody does anything wrong. We either get it right or we experiment. And so I never tell anyone they do anything wrong. And I do this out of oceanviewarts.com. So here's tips for sketching a glass of soda. So here's a sketch by one of my private students that he did in his sketchbook. And he sent me the picture and asked for some friendly feedback on how to make it look more like glass. So normally I prefer to have a reference image. So that would be either a photo of what you were drawing or an image if you were copying a photo to supply me with what you used as your reference material. And that really helps me help you better. But in this case, he didn't have that. And so we can still do quite a bit even without that. So that's what we're going to do today. I recommend if you're going to try to learn how to draw glass or practice with it, do not use clear glass, which is on the upper left, and do not use faceted glass, which is on the lower left. They're both really hard to draw, especially if they're clear or almost clear, like that greenish one on the bottom. You definitely want to use colored glass, as you see on the right. So that would be your first step if you're in charge of setting something up in your studio or at home where you can draw. However, this student was out at a cafe and he was drawing in his sketchbook. And so you don't always have control over what you're going to set up for that. And it's always better to draw than not to draw. So I'm very glad that he did this. And those are some tips if you want to set something up. So let's look at shape and perspective first. So the first thing that was really well done was these ellipses. Now this is perspective. The ellipse on the top of the glass is proportionately a little flatter and skinnier than the one on the bottom, and that's absolutely correct. If we look on the right at eye level, we see if a glass is up at your eye level, that round top will look like a straight line at your eye level. And as you bring it down lower and lower, lower, that ellipse gets more towards rounder and rounder. This is in contrast to what your left brain or your one part of your brain wants to tell you. It wants to tell you that that glass is sitting on a flat surface, so you should draw a flat, straight line. And most people tend to make that bottom ellipse much too flat because of that. But if you know this about perspective, that can help you get that ellipse looking rounder and more realistic. And here we see the ellipses kind of colored in with the reddish color. And you can also see them colored in on the cylinder at right, which shows you how the proportion of that oval changes as it moves further away from eye level. So the other thing we want to look at is where we bisect those ovals. And the bisecting line going through the middle should be horizontal. And we'll notice on the top one, that line is angling a little bit. So that tells us that that top ellipse is a little bit angled. So one of the things to enhance this drawing would be to straighten it out a little bit, tilt that ellipse up a little on the left and down a little on the right so it looks a little more flat. Another way to check what's happening in your drawing that a lot of people don't think of is just to turn it upside down. The more you look at a drawing right side up, the more your brain tries to convince you that everything's okay. It's sort of like being in a bad relationship. You can't see it, but your girlfriends can because they have a different perspective. So that's what happens when you take your drawing and turn it upside down. You immediately give yourself a new angle from which to view your drawing, and you can tell what might be needing to be adjusted. And in this case, we are drawing a perpendicular line up from the bottom ellipse, and it's a vertical line. And we can see when we bisect that glass, that the top of that glass is a little larger on the right-hand side than it is on the left. Our brain can see that better when it compares something, and the way that it compares it is by bisecting it. So the brain is going to compare the left side to the right side, and that's what's going to enable you to see what's going on with the shape. Now, I don't know what this glass really looked like. I don't know if it really looked more like the shape on the left or more like the shape on the right. But what I do know from my experience is that glasses are symmetrical and this one isn't. So as a viewer, I would notice that. So that's one of the things that you'd want to adjust. And here we can see with the green lines that the angles on the outside of the glass are slightly different angles. The one on the right is a little more angled. The line on the left is a little closer towards vertical. So that shows you how the wedge shapes of those two wedge shapes that form the two sides of the glass are a little bit different in shape. So you just want to decide which one you like better and then match that side to the other side, match the two sides to the one you like better. Good. Another thing this student did that was very good was this line of the table. You can tell that he did what I taught him to do, which is to draw that line straight through the object and don't stop and start it, because he got a continuous looking line. Even though you can see in the upper left, we don't actually see that line going through the glass, although we should, and we'll find out about that later. But if it was an opaque object, we wouldn't, and we shouldn't. But that gives you a good feeling of that the background is contiguous because the line is continuous. So we'll look at form and values. Values are darks to light. We see a value chart on the right-hand side, very similar to what Frank Reilly used at the Art Students League. So you have your dark values at the bottom and your light values at the top. So one of the things that's important in values is to ask ourselves, where is the light coming from? Now, there's not a lot in this drawing that gives us a hint about where the light is coming from. But there's this one highlight on the bottom, and that highlight would have to be coming from the side the light was on, so we are going to assume the rest of the light is coming from the upper left. So if the light was coming from the upper left, that straw, which is a cylinder, should also have light, shadow, and reflected light on the straw, and that would give it more form. So on the right, we see two cylinders. The one on the top has light, shadow, and reflected light on it. It would represent the top of the straw. The cylinder on the bottom represents what that straw would look like inside transparent liquid. So this straw is inside soda, which is a transparent liquid, which forms a kind of filter. And so it will darken the value in the light of that straw. So this is another close-up, a little bit of what that straw would look like if it was standing straight up and down in liquid. So the top of the straw has more obvious light and shadow on it. The bottom of the straw still has some light and shadow on it, but it's affected by looking through the liquid. And the very top of the straw, you'll notice the shadow and the light are switched. Now, that may not happen on the straw in the picture of the left because that straw is facing away from the light. But if the straw was straight up and down, the interior portion would have shadow on the left and light on the right, which is the opposite of the exterior portion, which has light on the left and shadow on the right. So on the right-hand side, I have added the straw, a little bit of dimension to it, what it might look like if this drawing was adjusted to include the straw. And you can see that even though we haven't done anything to the glass yet, we are starting to get a feeling of 3 dimensions in this drawing. So we'll look at transparency next. So on the left-hand side, that red ellipse, we are looking through one thickness of glass. Now on the right-hand side, the 2 red arrows with the number 2 show the area where we're looking through 2 thicknesses of glass. We're looking through the front layer of glass and the back layer of glass at that point. Now glass, this is not colored glass, but it does have a little bit of a value to it. And so we have to take that into account. The green arrows show where we're looking through one thickness of glass plus the value of the transparent soda. So we have an additive process. So you want to think of what the layers are here, and we have an additive process. So transparent layers, when they're put on top of each other, are generally additive. There are always exceptions, but in this case, we want to think about each layer making it usually a little bit darker. So this is a great painting by a artist from the 1600s, excuse me, and it called Glasses in a Basket. His name is Sebastian. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's showing off here and clearly entitled to do so. This is a magnificent painting of glass, metal, and the basket is amazing. You can see the glass through the basket. And so he's done a wonderful job. So this is a good thing that you can do when you're drawing a particular thing, is go to a museum or online and take a look at some old masters paintings of the same subject. And once you've started your drawing and have some questions, then looking at old masters paintings can be very valuable in providing answers. So we're going to look here in the triangle on the left. We have this kind of additive value of the front layer of glass. Inside the triangle is the front layer of glass, plus the liquid in the glass, and plus we're seeing through that at the background. And then on the right-hand side with the green triangle, we're looking through, again, the front thickness of glass and the liquid, but we are looking through it at something different. We're looking at a lighter table. So that would affect what we see through there. So I've added some values a little bit on the right. Now on the left, we see the separate areas. And on the right, I've put in a few values. Now the top area is questionable. The area with the blue ellipse, that might want to be darker. It's hard to tell. I don't have a reference image, so I can't tell exactly what's going on in the background, or whether there was dust on the glass or glare on the glass, or something else like that that might affect my decision. So since we don't have a reference image, I'm just going with some kind of average ideas to answer my students' question about how to make the glass look a little more transparent. And you can see just by me adding the values in there on the right hand side, the glass also starts to look more transparent. We'll see in the next drawing. Here we have the drawing on the left that the student did, and the drawing on the right, which is starting to approach looking a little more transparent. So then I've added the straw here, and the straw allows us to get a feeling of light and shadow that we don't have any other object in here really that's a solid or opaque object. The straw may not have been opaque. The straw may have been clear. I don't know because I don't have a reference photo, but I decided to make it opaque because that helps the drawing. And so we do see that the value of that straw changes depending on which part of the glass that it's going through. So then we're going to look at the side of the glass here. Generally on the side of the glass is a little bit darker, and I'll show you why. So this is a cross section of the glass looking down. So we are above it looking down, and in the center, light is going through the glass, and the red area is where the light hits resistance. Resistance meaning the thickness of the glass. Wherever light hits resistance when it goes through glass, it loses some of the light, and when it loses light, it gets a little darker. So we lose a little bit of the light as it goes through those two areas of glass. But look what happens on the side. When the light goes through the side of the glass, it goes through a much thicker area of glass because of the angle of the light. Looks to me like 5 or 6 times thicker. So because of that, less light would be able to go through the glass. And because less light goes through, that area would be darker. So that's why the edge of the glass often looks darker to us on the side away from the light. So here we have it. And you can see by the arrow, I've put just a little bit of a darkness on that side to help give that feeling of the glass, the thickness of the glass. Now, we remember we saw that highlight on the bottom of the glass when we first looked at it. That's how we determined where the light was coming from. If there's a highlight on the bottom of the glass there should be a highlight on the rim of the glass at the top where the other arrow is. So I put one there. So you can see that right there gives it a highlight that makes sense. And we can see that by adding some of these changes, we have gotten more uh, transparent effect in the glass on the right. There's still one more thing. There should be some kind of shadow. An object sitting on a table should cast, if it has light on it, and if it has a highlight, that shows us there's light, it should cast some kind of a shadow. Otherwise, it looks like it's hovering over the ground. So again, since I don't have the reference image, I'm not exactly sure what that shadow might look like, but I made a good guess and I put something in there. And you can see when you compare the glass on the right to the one on the left, that the one on the right has a feeling of sitting down more solidly on the table. So if we were to look at this again with a reference image, we might change a few things, but overall, we have created, based on what we know about classical drawing, we have created an image here that has a more transparent effect, which was what the question was. So thank you for watching. And remember, I offer private lessons and consultations and very friendly feedback at oceanviewarts.com. Come take a look and see what we offer there. And thank you for visiting.